Midnight approached as the lights in the museum began to flicker, casting dancing shadows upon the ancient statues, dusty manuscripts, and gilded relics. Roland Thompson stood inside the main marble-floored hall, a small flashlight in hand, bracing himself for the nightly mayhem soon to erupt. This was no ordinary museum. Established by his great-grandmother, Viola Thompson, it was known to locals by its official name, Thompson's Oddities and Relics, but among those who understood its true nature, it was simply called the Cursed Museum. Even as a young child, Roland had known something was amiss in the museum's corridors. He'd see a statue shift deviously out of the corner of his eye, or hear the telltale thump of some artifact hitting the ground. His parents often hushed him, telling him to keep quiet so as not to scare away visitors. But nothing was more terrifying and thrilling than that hush that descended right before midnight. The relics would come alive, unleashed by curses from centuries past, and they had to be contained before they spilled out onto the city streets. Nightly, Roland's mother Eleanor and father James took on the monumental task of corralling the possessed items, ensuring they remained locked tightly away in glass cases, magically sealed with protective wards. By day, those wards seemed sufficient, yet as soon as the clock struck 12, the relics gathered a sinister energy of their own, defying any constraints they had known during daylight. Over the years, the family had developed an entire system to relocate, confine, or counteract newly acquired objects that threatened to wreak havoc. Tonight, Roland faced these relics on his own for the first time. His parents had been called out of town to track down a suspicious artifact discovered in a rummage sale. This left him in charge, a position he'd never truly wanted, nor felt ready for. He made his rounds in the main hall, checking the glass cases and the hidden rooms etched beneath them. Although the bright overhead lights were switched off, the emergency lights cast an eerie teal glow, giving the space a ghostly sheen. He knew the museum's floor plan by heart. The grand atrium at the entrance, the Egyptian wing to the left, the medieval reliquaries down a corridor to the right, and, in the rear, the vaults reserved for the most dangerous items. He paused in front of what looked like a simple clay pot. A faint pattern of swirling lines marked its sides. At first glance, nobody would have suspected it contained the cursed ashes of a vengeful sorcerer. In daylight, the pot appeared unremarkable, a nondescript vessel. But when evening fell, the pot let out whispers from within. Roland could have sworn he heard a faint humming all around him, prompting him to check if the pot's glass case was fully locked. The hum died down, then resumed moments later as if waiting to strike. There was no time to dwell on single artifacts for too long, as each relic demanded its own attentiveness. He needed to check each corridor. The next area housed an elaborate tapestry known for stitching and unstitching itself in response to moon phases, made centuries ago by a cursed weaver whose heartbreak over her spouse's betrayal drove her to seal dark magic into her craft. The tapestry was rumored to try to ensnare unwitting viewers into its woven fabric. Roland knelt, shining his flashlight. The tapestry's color shifted slightly, threads moving as though alive. He whispered a protective chant under his breath. A short verse passed down through the Thompson family. The threads stilled, at least momentarily. From the corner of the corridor, a staff crowned with a serpentine head rattled in its case. Roland recognized it as the staff of Ishard, believed to be carved centuries ago from the trunk of an arcane tree that no human dared approach. The serpent's eyes were made of polished gems, and legend claimed that at the stroke of midnight, they glowed with a dangerous luminescence, capable of hypnotizing anyone who dared use the staff. Roland glanced at a clock overhead, 1 minute to midnight. He had to lock down as many artifacts as possible beforehand. He began reciting a second incantation, one that fortified the protective glass. Tense anticipation knotted his stomach. The words tumbled carefully from his mouth, and a flicker of violet sparks rippled across the case's perimeter. The staff momentarily stopped rattling. Then came the chime of midnight, signaling the unleashing of all curses at once. In the Egyptian wing, elaborate canopic jars began vibrating as the ancient organs they contained stirred. stone scarabs affixed to tomb lids gained a shimmer of life in their ruby eyes. From the medieval corridor, suits of armor clattered. A tarnished sword known as the Sighing Blade let out a faint lament, as though haunted by the screams of its past wielders. Roland swallowed hard, swinging his flashlight around in a wide. He had expected this, but the real-life chaos still sent chills racing along his arms. He pressed a button on a device clipped to his belt. This was his father's invention, a magical frequency emitter that helped contain some of the weaker curses. Its hum resonated across the thresholds, making certain relics pause for a moment, as though entranced by an inaudible command. Roland heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, brandishing the emitter. Emerging from the darkness was his younger sister, Maria, clutching a battered book of incantations. "I'm here to help," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Though only 13, she had already memorized spells that astonished their parents. Roland let out a breath of relief. He didn't have to face this night alone. Maria flipped through page after yellowed page to find the curses that corresponded to the museum's top threats. They had meticulously curated this book to contain instructions for each haunted object and how best to subdue it. Now they only needed to survive long enough to carry out those instructions. A series of rapid clicks echoed down the hall, and Roland recognized the sound. The jade insects had awakened in their case. These were thousands of jade-carved scarabs from China's Tang dynasty, rumored to rally small creatures under their command. The glass case rattled, small fractures already forming from the pressure. Roland motioned to Maria to start reading the relevant entry while he aimed the magical frequency emitter. The hum grew louder. He could see tiny fissures creeping across the glass like spiderwebs, threatening to shatter. Maria found the right page and began chanting in a halting, nervous tone. Slowly, the tension on the glass eased. The jade carvings relaxed, though Roland could swear they glared at him in defiance. He flicked the emitter off to conserve its power. Adjoining corridors erupted with ominous clatters. Roland heard the distinct ring of metal scraping stone. By memory, he knew that was the iron automaton in the corner of the medieval exhibit. It stood over 7 feet tall, forged by an alchemist who had imbued it with an unwavering hatred for living beings. Previously, it had been subdued by magical seals welded onto its chest plate, but every evening it tried to break free. If it managed to leave the museum, it could trample half the city's streets before sunrise. Roland urgently gestured to Maria, and together they raced into the corridor. The automaton pounded its gauntlet fists against the glass of its display. Micro cracks, shining in the pale glow, snaked across the surface. Maria began flipping to the incantation for the iron automaton. Roland listened anxiously for any sign that the seal might give out. His heart hammered. The protective glass gave a final groan, then shattered. Pistons within the ancient metal figure hissed. Its eyes glowed a deep crimson. Roland aimed the frequency emitter, but the iron automaton seemed unaffected. Whatever magic drove it was strong, requiring a different approach. Maria started the chant, the syllables sounding raw and unpolished in her anxious rush. "Distract it!" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Roland sprang forward, shining his flashlight into its glowing eyes. For a fleeting moment, the automaton jerked its head away, but then it lunged. Its movements were startlingly quick for such a bulky creation. Roland dove aside, feeling a wind blast behind him as the metal fist smashed into the marble floor, leaving a spiderweb crater. Maria's voice reached a crescendo. Her chant built power in the air like static, raising the hairs on Roland's arms. Once she pronounced the final syllable, faint blue sparks swirled around the automaton's joints. It groaned, step by reluctant step, until it froze in mid-motion. Thick runic chains appeared around its torso, forcing the relic's arms to lock at its sides. A blast of stale air escaped its chest plate, and its glowing eyes dimmed. Roland seized the chance, reciting a quick incantation his father had taught him to form a new glass barrier. A shimmering wall took shape in front of the automaton, fusing with the metal frame of the display. Maria exhaled, cheeks flushed, adrenaline still coursing through both of them. Before they could catch their breath, a new crisis erupted in the Egyptian wing. The canopic jars had toppled from their stands, and the foul stench of magic wafted through the corridors. The inscriptions on the jars flickered a sickly green. As the siblings rushed in, they found the lids scattered across the floor. Ink-like tendrils of spiritual energies rose from the wretched organs that had once belonged to an ancient priest-king. The museum's overhead lights glimmered on the swirling supernatural mass. If left unchecked, the priest-king's spirit could reform a partial body and attempt to seize a mortal host. Roland remembered from his training that containing these jars required an amulet kept in the vault. He motioned for Maria to hold the priest-king's spirit at bay while he sprinted deeper into the museum. Corridors blurred in his peripheral vision. He had only ventured into the vaults a handful of times with his father. Security wards guarded the entrance, responding only to Thompson blood. Arriving there, Roland placed his hand on an ornate bronze door. A bright incandescence scanned across his palm. Then came a click, and the vault doors parted. He slipped inside. Rows upon rows of hidden compartments lined the walls. Each had a faint glyph etched onto it that corresponded to a different relic. Roland found the glyph for the Egyptian wing's cursed jars, an eye with a serpent coiled across it. He tugged open the drawer. Inside sat the golden amulet, encrusted with hieroglyphs. Its surface was cold to the touch. He wrapped it in a piece of protective cloth and hurried back. He made it to the Egyptian wing just as the black tendrils attempted to merge into a spine-chilling silhouette. Maria stood in front of the jars, chanting while beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. Her voice faltered when she saw her brother approach. Roland drew the amulet from its cloth. The priest-king's spirit turned, glowing orbs suggesting eyes, fixated on the object. It let out a low moan, as though enraged by the amulet's presence. "Take it," Maria called, passing him the incantation book. She pressed her trembling hands together, trying to finish her own chant to slow the spirit's progress. Roland swiftly found the page for the amulet. His voice quivered when he read the text. A prayer to the ancient gods, meant to seal the disembodied spirit back within its vessels. The amulet warmed in his hand, golden inscriptions flaring like liquid sunlight. With a final chant, its glow burst forth in a brilliant flash, striking the spirit. The black silhouette hissed, limbs dissolving into ash-like particles. One by one, the floating tendrils vanished into the jars, and the lids slammed shut with a resounding clap. Silence fell, broken only by the siblings panting. Roland carefully pressed the jars back into place, reactivating the protective runes around them. It was then he remembered the pot of cursed ashes in the main hall. The hush was intensely ominous now. They dashed across the museum's polished floors. Before they even saw the pot, they heard a guttural scraping, like fingernails clawing on stone. The pot's glass display had cracked wide open. Its swirling lines now glowed with a faint maroon hue. They approached slowly. Thin wisps of ashes spiraled out, forming a small phantom figure in midair. Maria leafed through the incantation book for the pot's page, but Roland's eyes darted to the text. His stomach sank. The instructions for this particular relic were incomplete. They had never had to fully seal the ashes before because the pot's enchantments usually held them in. He glanced at the swirling spirit forming a devastating face. Pale eyes set in an ashen skull. Its mouth moved in a silent snarl. Maria pointed to a note in the margin of the incantation, bookhand written by their father. Temporary measure, recite amplification, verse, then disperse with anti-spirit wards. May require additional binding if it attempts possession. Roland's hands trembled as he turned the pages for the amplification verse. That chant could magnify their next incantation, creating a powerful enough force to contain the sorcerer's ashes. But it was hazardous. If used incorrectly, it might backfire. Still, they had few options. The spirit shrieked, an inhuman wail echoing off the marble columns. It lunged at them, swirling in a vortex of scattered ash. Roland raised the emitter, flipping it on. Static filled the air, flipping it on. Maria began the amplification verse, her voice resonant and strangely melodic. She repeated the chant 3 times. Roland felt energy course through the museum, crackling over the ancient statues and possessed relics, almost as if the building itself were absorbing the power. "Now the wards!" Maria shouted over the static. Roland attempted to recite the anti-spirit wards, but a wave of psychic force slammed into him. The emitter flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. The sorcerer's spirit howled, whipping around in a violent gust that almost knocked them off their feet. Pressing forward, Roland managed to find his voice. He spoke the ancient words, each syllable pounding in his chest. Maria's tone locked in harmony with his, weaving a combined strength. Arcane wind churned around them, swirling dust and flickering lights. The air pulsed again with a wave of bright turquoise. Gradually, the spirit lost cohesion, its form tearing like a rag in a storm. Ashes settled to the ground, melting back into the clay pot. The swirling lines dimmed, returning to their dull grayish color. A last echoing wail faded to silence. The 2 siblings sank to the floor, hearts still racing. The hush that descended was heavier than before. Roland checked his watch. Nearly 1 in the morning. They still had hours to go until daybreak. But usually, those first few minutes after midnight produced the fiercest onslaught of haunting. The museum felt momentarily contained, though they dared not let their guard down. Steeling themselves, they began patrolling again. Some relics still rattled in their displays, but none appeared on the verge of breaking free. Together they resealed cracked glass, reactivated runes, and reorganized any artifacts that had fallen or shifted. With every step, they reminded themselves that they were Thompson heirs, part of a lineage sworn to guard cursed relics from harming the world. It wasn't until they heard a faint banging at the museum's entrance doors that their hearts stopped again. Who could be outside at this hour? They exchanged uncertain glances. Roland pointed for Maria to remain hidden while he headed to the entrance. Through the double glass doors, he recognized an old family friend, Maggie, the local librarian, along with her young nephew. Maggie knocked hurriedly. Her face was etched with panic, eyes darting behind her. Roland quickly unbolted the door to let them inside. "What's happening?" Roland asked. Maggie's nephew clung to her, frightened. Streetlights flickered behind them as though electricity was failing in the surrounding blocks. Maggie's voice trembled. "Strange occurrences downtown. Automobiles are stopping dead, lights flickering, phones not working. Everyone's terrified some supernatural event is unfolding." She swallowed hard, glancing around the museum's dim foyer. "I suspected it might be tied to something here. Did any powerful relic break free?" Roland shook his head, thinking aloud. "We contained the worst of them so far." Maria appeared at his side, offering a reassuring smile to the frightened child, but inside she was shaking. She flipped through the incantation book until a late entry caught her eye. The occupant of the next page was an artifact kept in the vault. A twisting glass orb rumored to control ambient energy in its vicinity. Although the Thompson family had never entirely unlocked its secrets, it could disrupt electronics and electrical grids if partially awakened. Maggie's nephew tugged at her sleeve, staring with wide eyes at a suit of armor that clanked quietly down a corridor. "Is it safe here?" he managed, voice trembling. Roland exhaled. "For now. We'll keep you safe." He turned to Maria. "We should check that glass orb." She nodded. "Right. Let's go." The group tiptoed through the museum, Maggie and her nephew trying not to inhale too sharply at every eerie display. When they reached the vault entrance again, Roland placed his hand on the mechanism, letting the wards scan his palm. Inside the vault, they found a black cushion in the shape of a star. Atop it stood the twisting glass orb, about the size of a grapefruit, swirling inside with faint shards of light. Roland could tell immediately something was wrong. The orb's usual faint radiance had intensified, sparks flaring like lightning. This relic had awakened for reasons unknown. With each flicker in the orb, a subtle wave vibrated through the vault. Roland felt it prickle at the back of his neck. He flipped through the pages once more, searching for instructions. Maria read them over his shoulder. "We have minimal notes," she whispered. "It says only, neutralize with synergy from relics of pure intent. Approach with caution." Maggie set her nephew behind her, scanning the compartment. "We need something pure. All I see here are cursed or dangerous items." She paused, noticing a small silver star pendant among the relics. "What's that?" Roland gently picked it up. This was my grandmother's protective talisman. She believed it was blessed by a mystic from our ancestry. As far as I know, it's not cursed. Maybe that counts as a relic of pure intent. They angled the talisman closer to the orb. The swirling lights within the glass orb clashed sharply, giving off a blinding spark. Dim cracks began forming on its surface as if it were on the edge of bursting. The museum shuddered, and outside they heard a distant metallic groan. Roland feared for the protective wards around the building, unsure if they could hold up under so many concurrent surges of magic. He closed his eyes, pressing the talisman against the orb's gleaming surface. He tried focusing on a memory of his grandmother, to channel her protective spirit. Maria began chanting softly, drawing on the same verse they had used to amplify the sealing spells. The moment the star pendant contacted the glass, a brilliant white glow emanated from the point of contact, radiating outward like a small supernova. Electricity cracked, arcs of glowing energy colliding with the amulet. Roland winced, straining to keep his hand steady, almost certain the orb might explode in his face. But then something astonishing happened. The white glow bathed the vault in warmth rather than pain. The cracks in the orb sealed themselves, the swirling lights within calming to a soft twinkle. One final surge ignited and dissipated, exhaling a gentle breath of air, and the orb's glow dimmed back to a faint sparkle. Roland staggered. Maggie caught his shoulder. Maria lowered the incantation book, staring in awe. Even the vault's wards seemed to relax, as though peace had returned. "Is it over?" Maggie asked, voice hushed. Roland nodded slowly, carefully placing the orb back onto the padded cushion. "As long as we keep it aligned with pure intent, I'll tie the talisman around it as an extra measure." From a nearby drawer, he retrieved a length of braided rope, used for binding spells, securing the star pendant to the orb's glass surface. When he finished, he felt renewed calmness in the vault. They emerged into the corridor. Maggie's nephew let out a shaky breath. Distantly, the overhead lighting flickered back into steadiness, and the hum of the city's electricity stabilized. Outside, the glow of street lamps returned to normal, and the distant sirens that had blared off and on quieted. The museum corridors, too, rested silent, relics secured in their proper wards. A sense of victory coursed through Roland, along with a sobering realization. He had just faced a trial he never thought he could endure alone, and managed it, hand in hand with his sister. He turned to Maria, pride and gratitude filling his voice. "We did it. The relics are contained. The city's safe." She nodded, her eyes bright with relief. "It's not easy work, but it's what we do." Maggie pressed a grateful hand to Roland's arm. "Thank you, both of you. It's remarkable what you've accomplished." As dawn approached, the siblings walked through the museum one last time, double-checking the wards and displays. The iron automaton, sealed behind reinforced glass, stood immobile. The Egyptian jars, calm and quiet. The cursed ashes slumbering in the clay pot. Other relics, subdued by renewed incantations and magical wards, awaited the museum's morning hush, as though they were mere mundane artifacts once more. This strange building, inherited through generations, loomed as both a treasure trove of knowledge and a dangerous source of curses that could swallow the unsuspecting whole. Standing in the main hall, Roland gazed on the objects with a newfound respect. He could almost hear the echoes of all the curators that came before him, from his great-grandmother to his parents who watched over these relics like guardians. Maria slid her hand into his, her voice tired but hopeful. "We'll keep protecting them, won't we?" "Yeah," he responded, smiling. "We're Thompsons. That's our legacy." Maggie and her nephew prepared to leave, stepping outside into the early morning glow. They thanked Roland and Maria again, promising to tell anyone concerned that the bizarre power surges had settled. The siblings, exhausted but proud, stood beneath the arch of the entrance. Soft rays of sunlight threaded through the stained glass windows overhead, illuminating the dust in the air. One by one, the relics relinquished their midnight lives, returning to inert shapes hidden behind protection wards. Finally, the siblings locked the doors of the cursed museum, certain that the city remained safely unaware of just how close it had come to chaos. As the new day unfurled, they reminded themselves that night would fall again. The illusions of safety would fade, and the relics would stir once more. But that was the family mission, quiet and unwavering, to stand guard, contain each new outbreak of dark magic, and ensure the rest of the world never knew how close they were to the brink of supernatural upheaval. And so ended this particular night in the museum. With daybreak bringing a semblance of order, Roland and Maria took heart. They wouldn't be alone for much longer. By sundown, their parents would return with the newly discovered relic that would need to be catalogued, safeguarded, and no doubt cursed in its own dreadful way. But if there was one certainty in the Thompson family, it was that they would always stand together, fighting back the darkness that stalked from behind the museum's countless glass cases, determined to keep the city safe, one artifact at a time.